attitude with their left hand. And let me tell you, for those who are not left-handed, it's a struggle, but they somehow get it done. Then I tell them to take that same pencil, change it to their right hand, which most people are comfortable writing with, unless you're left-handed. And I told them to write the same word, attitude. And so they take their right hand, and I notice they write the word attitude much faster, and it's much more legible. And I have them hold up their paper with the word attitude written on it. And I show them the word attitude written with their right hand versus the word attitude written with their left hand. And I ask them, do you see a difference? And they all start laughing. They say, yes, we see a big difference. Instead of for those, who can write with both hands, hey, special guys, special ladies. We're not there yet. But I had a person say, hey, I can barely notice that I wrote the word attitude when I wrote it with my left hand. That's just how messy it looks. And I told him, you know what? Look at that word attitude very closely that you wrote with your opposing hand. I says, because this is usually the attitude we have. This is the way it looks whenever we have to try something new. Whenever you have to try something new, this is the way it looks, with that left hand written attitude, all jibbled up, bad attitude. If you're going to endure these times of change and transition, attitude is key. You must maintain a positive outlook on life. You must see the good in everything. Okay? So when you look at the word attitude written by your hand, if you want to try this at home, that you do not write with, see if you see a picture of the kind of attitude you usually have when you're trying something new. Let me go back to my slide presentation here. People and change. A behavioral study showed that people do not resist change as much as they do being changed. Let's repeat that again. People do not resist change as much as they do being changed. Well, what is it about people that they resist about being changed? Well, there's a couple of things I want to run over with you about being changed. First of all, people resist being changed when change is not self-initiated. Let me tell you what I mean by that. How is it that people resist being changed whenever a change is not self-initiated? Well, just think about this. Have you ever come up with a great idea? I mean, you're just struggling to find out how something is going to be done, or you're working on a project and you're sort of at that point where everybody's just in the gray area. They just don't know what the answer is. And then you come up with this great idea. At least you think it's great. Why? Because you own it. You own the idea, so you think the idea is great. Anything that we own, we're going to think is great. All right? But then all of a sudden, what you come to find out is that everybody in that group is not so happy with your idea. Let me say this. When people lack ownership of an idea, they usually resist it, even when it's in their best interest to accept the idea. Why do you think people resist this type of initiation? Because they don't feel like that they're being manipulated, or they don't like feeling like pawns of a system. So you allow them to give their input. You allow them to give their part in the process of change. You give them a voice, because let me share something with you, my friend. When you give people voice, you empower them. When you allow people to speak into the situation, you empower that person. We empower people by allowing them to be equals when it comes to voice of ideas and voice of initiation and voice of change. The worst thing you can do is just make all the decisions on your own without consulting anyone. Let me tell you, that's going to bring a lot of resistance. And that's why people usually resist change that is self-initiated. They don't want to feel like they're being manipulated or like a pawn. They want to feel like they're part. So the answer to this is, how do we stop this resistance to change? You make them feel a part of the process. Let's go to number two. Number two, people resist change when routine is disrupted. You notice that? Have you ever been in the midst of an office upgrade, or have you ever had to, let's say, for instance, work for a company and all of a sudden you guys are upgrading to the new Microsoft Office? Now you're going to 2007, you were in 2003. Well, this is what I mean by routine disrupted. Routine is disrupted when we are used to a particular flow of repetition of day-to-day tasks that we do, and all of a sudden, because of something new that you have to learn, some scheme you have to learn, now you're resisting this change that, of the new rollout or the new upgrade, because you realize that it's disrupting your routine. This is why people usually resist change. Let's look at bullet number 3. Change creates fear of the unknown. In other words, change means traveling in uncharted waters, and this causes insecurity to rise. Therefore, many people are more comfortable with old problems than with new solutions. It's easy to say no instead of being creative. A lot of times, really why people resist change is because of their tradition. We're going to talk about that one in the last bullet. Also, people resist change because they're not in agreement with change. People who refuse to be innovative have difficult time solving problems because they oppose to new ideas. They often miss the big picture because they focus on the small details. So when people are not in agreement, you'll notice they develop a resistance to change. And lastly, change creates a fear of failure. Now, this one I want to say to you face to face. I want to say this one to you face to face. Change creates fear of failure. I always said this, and I'm going to say it again. The greatest mistake anyone can make is to be afraid to make one. Can you repeat that with me? The greatest mistake I can make is to be afraid to make one. You're not going to go far in life if you don't take risk. I have a saying. Whenever I have to make a decision, I do my research, I pray over the decision, I consult those who I consider to be elders and those who are wise, who can offer counsel. I consult friends and families. But when this life-changing major decision comes about, when I decide to make a decision, a lot of these decisions haven't been right. But I've always developed this motto. You make a decision, you settle it with finality, and you live with the results. That's my motto. Make a decision, settle it with finality, and live with the results. Some things you just have to take a chance on, or you're going to live a life of fear. So fear of failure, don't be afraid to make a mistake. Let's go back to the slides. Let's talk about other reasons why people resist change. Also, people resist change because it's not beneficial personally. It benefits the company, say for instance, but you don't see how it's going to benefit you personally. So people will not change until they perceive that the advantages of changing outweigh the disadvantages of continuing with the way things are. Also, you'll notice that people resist change because they're too satisfied with the way things are. In other words, many organizations and people will choose to die before they will choose to change. Your ability to change with change is valuable. I have people who I call adapters. People who respond well to change are becoming more and more important